So my interpretations tell me about my meaning-making system. They tell me about how I perceive the world. They tell me a lot about my memories and my experiences to date. They also help me see patterns in the world. Education is an amazing and wonderful thing. There are people on this planet who know much more than I do about all kinds of subjects. And if I want to learn about those subjects, I would like them to teach me. I enjoy being a student. I enjoy being a lifelong learner. I very much see myself as learning and growing all the time. I seek out teachers all the time who can impart knowledge and clarity and insight and expertise that I'm wanting to internalize. Analysis is about taking a whole and breaking it down into all of its pieces and parts so that we can understand how something works. Analysis is incredibly useful for understanding, for depth of understanding, for clarity, for looking at the interrelatedness of things. I mean, think about taking apart a car. If I want to understand how a car works, I want to pull it apart into all of its different components and find out what component does what. And when this happens, what happens there? And how does that all work together? These are really valuable and important mental faculties. They work especially well with inanimate objects. Now, the reason why people who are learning nonviolent communication begin to vilify those things is because part of the shift, and Nathan, I'm kind of getting a little bit into your question right now about the, what do we leverage to make the shift? But part of what happens is that in a domination-based society, which most of us have been born into and raised in a domination-based society where the agenda is compete with one another, get more power, fewer and fewer people move up in the triangle. Like a dominator hierarchy is a triangle where many people are on the bottom with less access to power, and fewer and fewer and fewer people get to the apex holding more and more power. And I'm defining power as access to resources, and access to resources can be internal resources or external resources, just briefly, just so that we have clarity on concepts. So in this kind of a hierarchical system, the language and the thinking that gets privileged is objectification of people. People are objects to meet needs. People become consumers or producers. People get a role through which they are useful to a system. We dehumanize people. We begin seeing them only in, so sort of through how they serve a system. We look for obedience and compliance. Our school systems are set up for more and more, unfortunately, like a factory system, right? Where we want obedience, compliance, conformity, obedience to authority. We're not teaching critical thinking. We're teaching rote memorization and regurgitation of very particular ideologies. Conversations become debate-oriented. They become win-lose oriented. They become right-wrong oriented. We teach people how to fight. Whether we teach people how to fight physically, and then, in a society that privileges sort of violence, the most violent person, the strongest person, the biggest bully, the person who can be the meanest wins. This is a dominator hierarchy. Okay. In a dominator hierarchy, judgment is incredibly useful. Criticism is incredibly useful. The more that I can shame and blame you, the more I can put you down and pull me up. I mean, these are the tools of interpersonal and personal violence. And the goal is to win and to get more than everybody else and to be morally superior and to figure out who those bad people are so that we can exterminate them. I mean, this is the consciousness that we see all around us, right? Okay. So if you want to be able to defend yourself in that system, you'd better be good at domination tools. Okay, you've got to be able to fight back. You've got to be able to criticize back with the best of them. You've got to be able to educate back with the best of them if you want to be able to fight, which not everybody does. And I'm not saying everybody should, but these are the tools that we want to get good at. Now, in a domination system, the other thing that we want to turn the volume down on is people's subjectivity, care. What people are feeling doesn't matter. What people are needing doesn't matter. So we subtly develop systems, and nobody is doing this intentionally. I know there are lots of conspiracy theorists out there. Maybe they are. Who the hell knows? I don't know. That's not interesting to me. What I see happening is there's a momentum that builds in a dominator hierarchy, and we just unconsciously begin absorbing it. So what we're doing here, as you have all of these people who are like, what about healing? Domination hierarchies are traumatizing. They just are. That's why we have such a traumatized population. That's why we have a huge, huge increase in addictions, in mental health issues, in depression, in anxiety, in violence, in psychopathy, in personality disorders, because those kinds of systems don't actually meet people's needs and do not serve life on the planet. They serve the interests of a few people. And it's usually the people who are really good at being mean, just to keep it really simple. That's how it works. So if we want to create cultures and societies that are kind, that are open-hearted, that are collaborative, that are innovative, that can think in complex ways about the problems on our planet, if we really want to start making a shift in consciousness or culture or ways of being that are about preserving life on the planet and living together peacefully as a global community, that's a drastically different game. And judgment and criticism is not going to help with that agenda. If we're about healing and relationship and interdependent living, then we need to start understanding the ways that we've internalized domination systems and domination system tools. And a lot of those things are judgment, criticism, superiority, grandiosity, blame, shame, wrongness, analysis, used in a domination hierarchy for a very particular agenda. And the shift means the first step is our own personal healing. How have I been traumatized? And how do I perpetuate domination in my own way of being? What have I internalized? What do I want to get conscious of? And what do I want to begin transforming? The first place we transform domination systems is inside of ourselves, in the ways that it lives in my subjectivity. So I start healing. And I start waking up and I start developing new capacities. And the new capacities have to do with the 4 distinctions that we practice in something like nonviolent communication. I notice how evaluative I am, and I practice becoming also observational. So I have both the skill of describing to you neutrally what is happening, and I can also see the part of me that is interpreting and evaluating it. But I start seeing the difference between these two things. Then I make the distinction between everything that I'm thinking and my cognitive consciousness, which is very much privileged in a dominator hierarchy. And I bring back my feelings, and I teach myself once again that it does matter how I feel. And I develop an emotional literacy, and I learn the difference between emotional data and cognitive data. And then I look at the difference between strategies and needs. The strategies, the things I inherited as just how we do things, the status quo of how the world works, and the deep needs that I have as a human being that I share with all other human beings, that these strategies were designed as an attempt to meet, but many of them don't meet those needs anymore. And the strategies need to be updated. And then finally, the 4th distinction in nonviolent communication is the one that gets at power differentials. Because in a dominator hierarchy, we make demands. You should do this, you must do this, you have to do this. If you don't do this, such and such will happen. If you do this, you will get X, Y, Z. It is a power over, power under way of relating through demands, rebellion, and submission. That's the triangle in a dominator hierarchy. I demand you do this. You can choose to rebel or submit. Okay, if you submit or comply in the short term, There will be a very heavy price to pay in the long term. And then in nonviolence, in relational living, we make requests and invitations, we make suggestions, we propose things, and we're equally open to a yes and a no, because we're not interested in coercing people to do things against their will. That's one of the fundamental principles of relational nonviolence. You want people to choose to do something because they see how it benefits them, because they can see how it is connected to getting their own needs met. And if they can't see how this is life affirming for themselves, it will be experienced as coercion, manipulation, and power over, which we don't want, because that kicks up toxic side effects. So the point of leverage is finding the domination system within yourself, doing your own healing and trauma work, and then developing the skills that you need to be in relationship with the dominator hierarchy, not in at war with. And when people learn those distinctions initially in nonviolent communication, often it comes across to them like, don't evaluate, only speak in neutral observation. Don't use your thinking and interpretation, only talk about your feelings. Strategies are bad, needs are good. Demand energy is bad, requests are good. I want to unpack that. I want to address that. For me, I don't see this side as bad. These are functions that we want to be able to have. There needs to be a feedback loop in my world between these. And the consciousness that is in charge in each of us, I would like to see that be a loving, aware, compassionate consciousness. But that consciousness can both transcend and include all of the other things that we have inside of ourselves, because what a domination hierarchy is very, very good at is self-protection. And if we begin saying that self-protection is bad, that is a huge problem for me. Because I think there's a lot of danger in saying, oh, don't protect yourself anymore. Just come only with vulnerability. I just see a lot of problems with that. So I think we need to learn the skills of being able to come with vulnerability, of being able to choose nonviolence, of having the skills and capacity for peacemaking, but not from a naive denial bypassing point of view where we just say all of this is bad and I'm not going to do it anymore. No. You need all of those skills. If you can't fight, you can't be nonviolent. You can only choose nonviolence if you can also choose to fight and you're making a choice not to. Otherwise, it's just passivity. It's just submission. It's just weakness. I don't see correction as bad. If I'm driving a car and I'm trying to get really skillful at driving a car, and I bring an expert and I say, point out to me the things I'm doing that I can improve, correct me, it serves my learning. Education and correction, when it is uninvited, is not effective. When you assign yourself into the role of educating others and they have not invited you to provide them education, you're going to get a lot of resistance. It's not an effective strategy in that context. If somebody is coming to you and saying, I'm really struggling with blah, 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 and I'm really upset, et cetera, and you begin giving them advice, when what they want is empathy, the advice is going to be useless. So this is not about saying that advice is bad or correction is bad or education is bad. This is about saying, are you using those strategies in alignment with what is actually needed? Because the first task is attuning to what the person is needing and asking for. And very, very often people want empathy, and we come with education and it's painful. And it's not painful because education is bad. It's painful because it's misaligned to what is needed in that relational context. I'll give you another example. My Wednesday morning calls are designed for education. 50 some of you are on this call this morning because you want education. I love teaching. I'm happy to teach in contexts where somebody shows up and says, I want to learn something that you like teaching. This is a really good match. But if I were to do this, interact with people in the way that I do with you on this call in my personal life, it would not go very well. It especially does not go well with my daughter. It does not go well with my family members, and my friends are not asking me to teach them things. Subtly, teaching is a little bit of a one-up if you're not invited to. But if you've got a frame where I'm like, I'm happy to teach, if you want to learn, show up, then it can be incredibly fun and enjoyable for both parties. You always want to align your strategy with the needs that are at play. So if somebody just wants to be seen and heard, we work on seeing and hearing. If somebody wants to be reflected as they are, we work on doing that. If somebody is looking for empathy, we try and provide empathy. If somebody wants education and coaching and correction, then we provide that. Like, it's really about attuning, getting really good at attuning to what somebody is needing and responding to the feedback and being flexible in what we're willing to bring. So I love you're bringing that piece in, because to your point, coming with empathy when somebody does not want emotional intimacy can feel like a boundary invasion. So you want to be careful about that too, okay, especially in certain contexts.